completed my work on the SeaLion40 scenario for their finest hour, I thought I'd go ahead and record a demo here. My basic idea behind this was I thought it might be fun to play out the ground campaign without worrying too much about the naval stuff, which really doesn't interest me a whole lot. As I got deeper into that, I discovered it was kind of impossible, but I think nevertheless I've come up with some reasonable solutions to playing as much ground as possible with as little naval as possible. So here's an idea of how I did that and what's going on. First of all, as usual, we have a more or less historical setup for the Allied forces, mostly British, in the UK. I've added on a couple of very minor Allied forces that, probably they shouldn't be here, but I have some Czechs and some Belgians and some Dutch and so on, even some Norwegians, just for the fun of it, because they did have tiny contingents in the UK at that time. The way the historical setup works is that, as usual, I know exactly where some of the units need to be placed, so they are indeed placed there. And I know of some hexes that definitely need to be covered with somebody. And then I have some units left over, especially some construction engineers and things like that. So the system approaches this by putting units in positions where known, and then making sure that important hexes are covered by somebody, and then randomly placing the remaining units in suitable hexes throughout the UK. Now, of course, I've got the map down kind of low here. It runs all the way up to here. So you can see that much. We even have Ireland, although I don't expect there are going to be any landings over there. But here's where the main action is going to be occurring. In addition to the historical setup, as usual, there is free setup for the Allies, if desired. And tinkering around with that, you can pretty much prevent a successful German landing if you drag all those units out of Scotland and so forth, if you're willing to allow that. So I'm just going with the historical stuff here. More importantly, we're going to have to deal with shipping to the UK. Even though my idea was I just wanted to fight a ground campaign, we got to get the troops over there. We have to figure out how we're going to make that work. Their finest hour has some pretty complicated naval stuff going on, including hit boxes for capital warships and flotillas of submarines and so forth. And that was a bit much for me, but I decided that I needed to deal with it somehow. So I've put together something. Naval forces, and I should say air and naval forces operating in the North Sea and the Channel and so forth will always have some bearing on the game, at least to some extent. Also, there's weather. Now, their finest hour had a non-standard weather system. I decided to go more with second front, which seems to be sort of the Europa standard. So there are different weather conditions at sea. And of course, the weather is going to be even more impactful depending on the destination. So whether or not you want to deal with air naval operations, you do have to put up with the weather. If you're sailing from, say, Calais to Dover during calm sea weather, then you probably don't have to worry about anything. But there's also rough weather and stormy weather at sea. And if you try to ship forces, say, from Calais up to northern Scotland in rough weather or stormy weather, you can pretty much figure that you're going to lose shipping, lose cargo, including troops, and there's going to be a good chance that your convoy is going to be aborted. So no matter what else is happening, there will always at least be a role for the weather. So even if RN and RAF don't intercept your convoys, you need to pay attention to weather here. So in terms of RAF and RN intercepting convoys, something that I really didn't want to play around with too much, I decided to go with 3 different modes of dealing with that, and the player gets to pick which mode to use. So if we go ahead and get things started here, I'll give this a click. At the beginning of every game turn, this screen comes up, and it has the 3 different modes that are available. In the first mode, players will allocate air and naval forces to the air-sea battle that's going on, and depending on the strength of the opposing air and naval forces that get allocated to this, a big melee occurs behind the scenes in the bowels of the computer. So there'll be losses to air and naval for both sides. And in addition, the system will spit out the crucial shipping success rate, which just says this is the baseline. These are the odds that a convoy is going to get across from roughly Calais to Dover without being intercepted by RN and RAF forces. And so as we'll see in a minute, each convoy then has to take its chances based on that success rate that was determined by forces allocated to the air-sea battle. All right, the second mode is almost exactly the same thing, except players don't get to choose the air and naval forces that get allocated to that air-sea battle. Instead, the system figures out what to allocate, and that's based on some parameters that limit things so that the entire RN is not going to be available to take part every single turn, because some of those RN warships have to be back resupplying and refitting or whatever. But the system will, within certain parameters, decide exactly what forces get allocated. And then for the game turn, that same big air-sea melee is fought, and the outcome of that determines the shipping success rate for that game turn. So that's the second mode. The third mode is just enter it yourself, whatever you think is appropriate. If you read books about this potential of the historical hypothetical Sea Lion campaign that never quite happened, some authors seem to think that German forces really didn't stand a chance of getting successfully across the channel, whereas other authors postulate that they probably did have a pretty good chance. They might have gotten stuck over there. The Germans might have been unable to keep them supplied or reinforced or whatever. But you can decide for yourself, and what you would do here is say, I think there is a 0% chance of avoiding RN interception. So you'd put in a 0. Or you can say, I think there is a 100% chance that the Axis convoys will avoid RN and RAF interception. So you can put in whatever number you want. Maybe 50 is good. That's just what sits in there as the default. And then you can decide, because that baseline is Calais to Dover, do you want to automatically modify that based on sea conditions, because it could be calm, it could be rough, or it could be stormy, or do you want to automatically modify that based on the distances to the destination? Because remember, that baseline roll, that 50%, is if you're going from roughly Calais to roughly Dover, that Strait of Dover area. And if you say that you're going to leave both of those checkboxes checked, for example, and you say 50%, but you try to ship from Calais to Ireland, you're probably going to get intercepted anyway, because the modifications will be put in. But if you uncheck those boxes, then wherever you go, no matter what the sea conditions, there will always be whatever success rate you decide to put in there. All right, so let's go back to this mode. We'll pick mode 1 for our example here. So I'm going to confirm that. In mode 1, here the players will put in their forces. It tells you how many are available. These are rough point figures. And remember, anything that gets put in is stuck doing this job for the entire game turn. And so that means Axis air factors, for example, if they're assigned to the air-naval campaign, they won't be available for offensive or defensive ground support when you need them for your fighting when your troops are trying to wade ashore on the beaches of England. So we'll just throw some rough numbers in here. So we'll put in a 75 here. For the moment, I'm saying that you can only put in half your naval factors in any turn, assuming some guys are heading out, some guys are coming back, so some guys are being resupplied. So 50% of your forces can be out there at any time. We'll put in, roughly half of these, and you can absolutely say that these are silly numbers. I'm not saying these are optimal numbers. These are just for the demonstration here. And for the Royal Navy, let's go ahead and put in about 65. I think that looks pretty good. So those will be the numbers for the opposing air and sea forces allocated to the grand melee at sea. Behind the scenes now, there's going to be all kinds of numbers flashing around. There's going to be air-to-air combat. There's going to be anti-aircraft fire from the ships against the aircraft. The aircraft are going to attack the ships. The ships are going to attack each other. And so all four of those, the Axis air and naval and the Allied air and naval, almost certainly will be taking losses. And it's going to spit out the magic number. So let's see what happens for this game turn. So we see the results. We committed 75 Axis air points, lost 13, committed 33 Axis naval, lost 25. Allies committed 25 air, of which they lost 14, and the Royal Navy committed 65 points, and they lost 29. The shipping success rate for this turn is 90. That's the base rate for this turn based on the outcome of that melee, the base rate shipping from Calais to Dover. Now remember, if you try to ship farther away, then that rate is going to drop off and your convoys won't be so successful. So let's go ahead and close that. Now, this is what we normally see at the beginning of the turn. In this case, this is the so-called surprise invasion turn. We rolled for the weather, and zone C, that's ground, is clear. Zone D is also clear, and sea conditions are calm. So that's the best that the German player can hope for, and that's normally what's going to happen here for this August 2, 1940 turn. All right, so we close that, and now we're ready to actually begin our invasion operation. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to click on any hex that we want to land on. So we could take an unoccupied hex, such as this one. We could scroll all the way up and try to land someplace up here. But remember, although we've got that 90% success rate for going over to Dover, it's not going to be nearly that good if we try to go up there. Even though there are no defenders, I'm just not sure that it makes much sense to try to land up there. So just for the heck of it, let's go ahead and say we'll land in Dover. Now, after we've landed in Dover, for this particular invasion convoy, and only one per hex, one convoy per hex for invasion purposes, we're going to say that we want 5 escorts. And we're going to pick some troops here. Remember that you can't use any unit that has heavy equipment for an amphibious invasion. So we have all these broken down German divisions, and we'll take 2 regiments of the 6th Infantry Division. So it's going to require a total of 4 points of amphibious capability. And then, whoop, I ran down there a little bit too far. And what I really want here is I'm going to get a couple of these amphibious Panzer battalions. And these are very interesting. The German infantry gun battalions, which are rated as being artillery, so they will support the unsupported infantry regiments, but they're also rated as not having heavy equipment, so they're allowed to go over in the invasion turn. All right, so we've picked the escorts and the troops going in to land in the Dover hex, and now the convoy has to run the gauntlet. So there should be about a 90% chance of safely getting through here, and let's see what happens if we try to get across. They made it, but that's not what I wanted to happen. So we're going to go back to the beginning here. I'm going to come into this, and I'm going to set this up instead, and I'm going to say there's a 0% chance of getting across. And I'm going to say it's not dependent on any of that. So here are the results. This time, because I chose the third mode, the system picked the number of factors for Axis air and naval and Allied air and naval, and the shipping rate was not determined by this grand melee where factors were lost. Instead, it was determined by me saying I want it to be a 0% chance. So we close that. We've got good weather and sea conditions again, and now let's go back and land here, and we'll try again with some escorts. And I'll run down here a little bit, see if I can keep my screen together this time. We'll put in some amphibious panzers and some infantry guns. Now we attempt to conduct the landing, so we've got to hop across here. There we go. Come on. There we go. All right, so this time we were intercepted. But first of all, weather and sea conditions did not interfere with the convoy, and that's to be expected when you're going from Calais to Dover in good weather. However, Allied anti-convoy force attempted to engage the Axis convoy. So the system then said, look, you've got 16 points available from that pool of points that were put out into the grand air-sea melee, and naval points also 16, and the Allies had much fewer points available because of what the system did and what the losses were. So then it does the convoy battle for this one particular convoy, and we can see how many points were available, how many hits were made, and the bottom line here is that there were no hits impacting ground units aboard the convoy. See, it's entirely possible that that interception could have cost German ground troops from the invasion force, but in this case, none of them were lost. However, you know that under normal circumstances, just about every unit that attempts to conduct an amphibious invasion is going to be quartered in strength. On top of that, I've added a little bit of chrome here. So if your convoy is intercepted, even if you don't suffer any losses in that interception, it's certainly enough to put the convoy into disarray, and ground attack factors are going to be halved just because of the disarray caused to the convoy by the interception by the RAF and the RN forces. All right, so here comes our convoy. Oh, and look at this. This is an unusual roll. The convoy was aborted. So even though there were no losses, the random chance, and there was not a very big chance for this, the random chance is that that convoy was aborted. It turned back. It's not going to England. So we'll close that. And now we could start all over and pick another hex and see what's happening. But just in case that came up, I happen to have sitting over here the same invasion ready to go again, but set so that there will be no interception this time. So let's conduct this the same place. So as you can see, weather didn't turn them back. There was no interception. So when I clicked to run the convoy over, it just said, okay, yeah, I got here safely. And now the German invasion force is sitting in this hex. So Normally the troops would just be able to wade ashore, but we still have some air naval stuff going on here. We're going to take some defensive air support, and although I know that you can't really use this many factors, I'm going to throw them all in there. RAF, DAS going in. There are 7 factors of coastal defense batteries defending Dover. The Germans will just throw in, what have they got, 11 there. We'll put in just a whole bunch. We've got some available. We'll throw in some air support for the invading forces. And now there's going to be a battle in the invasion hex here at Dover. So we're going to have air-to-air combat. We're going to have anti-aircraft fire against the air factors from both sides, both the Allied and the Axis. There could conceivably be, and there will be, air attacks on coastal defense batteries because there's 7 factors of batteries there. So the German air will attack those batteries. The German escorts will attack the coastal defense batteries. The batteries will fire at the invasion flotilla where they might hit escorts. They might hit the amphibious shipping. They might sink some amphibious shipping, and they might destroy some of the landing troops, depending on how many of those coastal defense batteries get suppressed by the air and naval fire that's going in there. So we'll go ahead and resolve that combat. Oh, the other thing here, I see that we still have the +1 die mod. There was a role behind the scenes for each one of the amphibious Panzer battalions. They are quite susceptible to not making it ashore. I think there's a 50-50 chance for each battalion getting swamped and drowned and lost permanently on the bottom after they're dropped overboard. Anyway, we'll go ahead and resolve the combat. So here's defender fired, missed the attacker. Attacker fired 30 and hits. So that blew all of the RAF out of the sky there. Here we have our fighting for the coastal defense batteries. And note that air and naval can't actually knock out coastal defense batteries. They can only suppress them, and I believe that rule goes back to Second Front. Let's close that. More fighting. All this is just die rolls going on behind the scenes. Coastal defense batteries attacking. They only had 1 factor left. They did not score a hit on the landing force, so that's pretty crucial. Amphibious capacity wrecked during the opposed landing. The Axis invasion flotilla, mostly made up of barges and canal boats and things like that, is pretty fragile. So anytime they get used, and particularly during an opposed landing, you can expect to suffer a lot of losses to your amphibious shipping. So even if your amphibious invasion is successful, don't expect to be able to reuse a whole lot of your amphibious invasion, because don't expect to be able to reuse a lot of your amphibious shipping in another invasion, is what I'm trying to say, because a good deal of it is probably going to get wrecked on these beaches. So we'll close that. Here, as usual, is our diagnostic of exactly what happened. And I'm just going to scroll back up because I don't really care right now. And it ended up being odds of 9-1 once we added in the quartered and halved attacking forces, but plus air support and plus naval gunfire support. And we got a DE. And if we click here, then the invasion force is now ashore in England. So at this point, I could actually pretty much begin playing the land campaign, which, as you might recall, is all I really wanted to do. But after fiddling with this for 2 or 3 months, I decided that although I want to abstract the naval campaign as much as possible, and you can see I did abstract it. There are no individual submarines, no individual warship. It's just abstracted to points. But nevertheless, points need to be allocated. Points need to shoot at points. Points need to sink each other. And all of those things are going to depend whether or not the ground troops can successfully get to England and conduct the ground battle that I wanted to play in the first place. So that is the example of what I've been doing with SeaLion40.